Good morning to everyone. I am N. Rati Devi, MA, B.Ed, MPhil, CICTT, Cambridge. I am the Assistant Professor of English Department. Today we are going to see Social History of England 2 for the class 1st BA English. I am from Tirthangal College, Chennai. The first ruler of the social history of England is Tudor England. They ruled from 1485 to 1603. In Tudor England, Henry VII was the first king. He ruled from 1485 to 1509. He brought peace and economic stability to England. After 150 years of continuous war, Henry VII ruled over the country. He married daughter of Edward IV and he gave birth to 2 daughters and 2 sons. Henry VIII was the first son of Henry VII and he ruled from 1509 to 1547. He had 6 wives and he supported the sports, hunting and jostling than ruling the country. He murdered 130 people, including 2 of his wives who stood in the way. Churches were increased. He introduced Bible and prayer books. He introduced guns and into English army, and the punishment was severe during his reign. Next ruler is Edward VI. He ruled from 1547 to 1553. He was the only son of Henry VIII. At the age of 9, his father died and he came to throne. He was a very intelligent and educated but very weak. And he lived only for about 15 years and he said prayers of Catholic is illegal. The next ruler is Mary I. He ruled from 1553 to 1558. He was a Catholic. Mary reigned for 6 years. He was also called as a Bloody Mary because he murdered many people, especially the Protestants. And she died due to tuberculosis. The next ruler was Elizabeth I. She ruled from 1558 to 1603. She was really a successful woman in the man's world. Powerful lady, and she gave more importance to art and culture. Art and culture flourished during his reign, and she said, England should be united always, and she is a Protestant. She was the last ruler of Tudor dynasty. Here we could see Henry I, Henry VII, Henry VIII, Edward IV, then Mary I and Elizabeth I. The next reign of social history of England is Stuart Age. Stuart Age started from 1603 to 1714. James I was the first ruler of Stuart dynasty. He ruled from 1603 to 1625. After Elizabeth I's death, he succeeded the throne and he believed in divine right of kings. He was very fat, large eyes, lean and always lean on others' shoulders as he was a drunkard. Ruled without the help of parliament, supported Anglican and persecuted Catholic and Protestant. The next king is Charles I. He ruled from 1625 to 1649. He was also very sick like his father and he dismissed parliament and ruled alone. He persecuted Puritans. Civil war broke out with king's supporters and parliament. He was executed in the year 1649. 1649. The next Stuart age was over and his Commonwealth period started from 1649 to 1653. As they were not satisfied with the Stuart age, they started this Commonwealth period. After English Civil War, England was known as a Commonwealth of Republic. They faced hatred of royalty and Presbyterians. The Protectorate came into throne after this Commonwealth period from 1653 to 1659 with Oliver Cromwell as a Lord Protectorate. He was also a dictatorship. His rule was also very cruel. He ruled for 6 years. After Cromwell's death, again Stuart age started, and they had decided to continue the Stuart age in the year 1660 to 1685. It was ruled by Charles II. Normal relationship between kings and parliament after a long period of time. Reaching 1661 parliament for 18 years without election. He was ruling over the country. James II, 1685 to 1688 was his rule. Both enabled Catholics worship freely during his throne, inflamed public opinions, divided politicians into Tories and Whigs. Next was ruled by Mary II and William II in 1689 to 1694. William and Mary came into throne after the glorious revolution of 1688. The king and the queen ruled jointly from 1689 until Mary's death. He was at the age of 32. She died in 1694. Now again, William III has become the king from 1689 to 1702. King of England, Scotland and Ireland was ruled over by this king from 1689 until the death of him during 1702. He was also the Prince of Orange and the stadtholders of United Provinces of Netherlands. Stadtholders means chief magistrate. He was the chief magistrate of United Provinces of Netherlands. The next rule of Stuart king is King Anne. She ruled from 1665 to 1714. She was the Queen of Great Britain and Ireland from 1714. She was the last Stuart monarch, and her reign was marked by the War of Spanish Succession. The Union of Crowns ended this is the last Stuart dynasty. Let us see about the Queen Anne, age of Queen Anne. It was a prosperous period. He was known as a Augustan age, inspired people to go to church. During this period, people were so happy, enjoyed their life. Bible study revived during this period. Anglican church opened. Several charity schools were opened in England. Fierce rivalry between Tories and Whigs, keen to influence through papers and pamphlets, are published during the reign of Queen Anne. Literary men established all over the world. Joseph Edison for Whig and Jonathan Swift for Tory has established so many pamphlets and books during his reign. Wrote several pamphlets, created great political influences. The next is, there was the American War of Independence, war between residents of Great Britain. 13 North American colonies and colonial governments fought against in April 1775. It was also called as American Revolution. Both fought against France supported American in 1778. Revolution turned into civil war, into international conflicts. It has become an international conflict, American Revolution. American won in 1781 and the Britishers surrendered at Yorktown in 1783. The war formally ended. 8 years wars goes on. Religious theme developed. Colonial fascination with science, nature, freedom and information has developed. The next topic is impact of the war on England. Centuries of oppressions came to an end. Several causes for the revolution, social, economical, political and intellectual influences have developed. Noble represented well-class educated people, doctors and merchants have increased and are privileged. Poor peasants like lives was very difficult during this reign. Poverty everywhere, paid taxes to the state, churches and nobles. The next is, what are the colonies raised during this time? Rise of colonies in America. The colonization of Americas began in the early 16th century and continued till 1776. So many colonies influenced, established during this time. When the 13 colonies were incorporated into the United States, in the beginning there were 13 colonies and many have added after this. England was looking for new market and more profitable fields for its labor and capital. English colonists wanted to compete with Spain, Portugal and other countries for power and wealth. In 1606, King James I of England granted charters of Virginia Company and the Plymouth Company to establish permanent settlements in America. Then 1607, the Virginia Company established Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in America. Then 1620, the Pilgrims, English Puritans, Separatists settled Plymouth colony is in what is now Massachusetts. So many colonies have developed in America. In 1624, the Dutch colonized New Netherlands, which later became New York. 1638, the Swedish founded the first permanent settlement in Dalby as part of their company of New Sweden. In 1732, the province of Georgia was established, completing the 13 colonies. What are the developments happened during this time? Development of transport and communication in 19th century. During Victorian era, field of transport and communication developed a lot. Introduction of steam engine, railway, penny post, telegraph and cables are introduced. First steam engine was made by James Watt in 1769. Richard Trevithick, a pioneer of locomotives, introduced railways to the world. The speed of first train 30 miles per hour. It was introduced during 19th century. Telephone was introduced by Graham Bell in 1879. These are the developments occurred during 19th century. Development of scientific and science. Discoveries in England, Europe in 19th century. There was no state education of common people, working class people, illiterate. There were 3 kinds of schools established for working class people alone. What are the 3 kinds of schools? Day school, charity school and Sunday schools. Children, well-to-do were luckier than poor. Famous public schools, Eton, Harrow and Rugby and Westminsters were the important people who taught there in the schools. Outstanding headmasters were Samuel Butler and Thomas Arnold. These are the great personalities during that time, science and scientific development. What happened in the life? In 60s, Life in the 60s, tremendous changes in international social and cultural affairs. Man walked on moon. First ever human heart transplant carried out during the 60s. Human reached pinnacle of civilization. After 40s and 50s wars, Britain reconstruction and stabilization were occurred. Changes in living standard lifestyles and attitudes in 1694. Harold Wilson has become the Prime Minister of England. Death of great leaders occurred, such as John Kennedy, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Martin Luther King. Joseph Heller's Nobel Catch-22 was published in 1961. Norman Mailer and American Dream in 1965 was published, and so many other books have also published during this time. Life in 670s. The Wilson era came to an end. The Edward Heath was elected in 1970. Attempted to push Britain into the efficient future. Increase in real estate and so city development was occurred during that time. But inflation wasn't alarming. Trade was aggressive. So government collapsed in 1974. But returned as next Prime Minister. Power cut occurred, food shortage, wage demands, inflation and public borrowing ruined the country. Writers were established such as John Barr, Susan Sontag, John Fowles, Graham Greene, Doris Lessing and other writers have flourished all over the country. Life in the 80s. Incredible advances in communication and information technologies, medicines, transport, trade and so on. Margaret Thatcher held from 1979 to 1990. Biggest social event occurred. Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer's wedding happened during this time in 80s. I opened here because Third World Wars were reduced and people realized it would be an end of the problems. Life in 90s. Margaret Thatcher, an iron lady who successfully handled minor strike, England led to the prosperity, glory came to an end. Technologies like internet, mobile was on leave. So many technologies developed in the year of 90s. New tax known as community charge introduced. Biggest protest known as poll tax riots against Thatcher government as dissatisfaction with community charge. Newly formed UK Independence Party UKIP in 90s occurred during this time. What happens in contemporary England? The referendum was held in June 2016. There was great development in contemporary England nowadays. 52% of country voted to leave the social, economic and cultural life of British. Scotland, Netherlands, Ireland and Europe also voted to remain in EU. Royal families were in sorrow for Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II lost her sister Princess Margaret and also her mother. Milestone completed of 50 years throne of England. Elizabeth's milestone was completed of 50 years throne of England. A relationship with Scotland and Northern Ireland. Scotland and Northern Ireland shares a close relationship. There was a close relationship between Scotland, Ireland and also Northern Ireland, marked by deep historical, cultural and economic ties, largely due to the geographical proximities, shared Celtic heritage and significant population. moments between the two regions over centuries. However, religious and political complexities, particularly related to troubles in Northern Ireland, can sometimes strain the connection. In this, we have seen the relationship with Scotland, Ireland, and also Northern Ireland. Evolution of monarchy through 20th and 21st century. Monarchies was the most common form of government until 20th century. Till then, there were kings and queens ruled all over the world, evolved in 20th and 21st centuries. Many monarchies were replaced by republics, especially after World War I. After World War I, there was many monarchies and it was replaced by republics. Monarchs have limited or no political powers occurred. So the Commonwealth heads of government choose an individual to hold the position. Mass societies opposed by anti-colonial nationalist and Marxist movement. Due to this, there was a mass societies who opposed by anti-colonial nationalist and Marxist movements. Post-imperialism in England. What is post-imperialism? In England, it refers to the period after the British Empire's dissolution. The end of the World War II marked the beginning of the British Empire's decline and its colonies gained independence one by one. This had a profound impact on British nationhood after the end of World War II. Writers from the former colonies began to create their own works of literature in English. During this time, many writers have established all over the world, especially in England. Post-colonialism and addresses the cultural knowledge generated by the colonizers and how it was used to subjugate the colonized people. In this post-imperialism in England, these are the things occurred. Multicultural Britain. There were so many developments in Britain that is called multicultural Britain. The United Kingdom is a multicultural country with many different communities and cultures. In 2021, about 9% of UK's population was made up of people with non-British nationality. 500,000 enrolled in higher education each year. Many of them have started studying and developing their career in education line. There are several government agencies involved in multiculturalism, including the Department for Housing Communities and Local Governments and Equality and Human Rights Commission. There were several government agencies involved in multiculturalism. Everywhere there will be government agencies who came to help us in all the way. Wherever we go, they will help us. The government agencies were there to develop the multiculturalism in all over the places. Due to that, Department for Housing, Communities and Local Governments, and there was an Equality and Human Rights Commission also. Due to this, English national identity. English national identity is a sense of belonging. What is national identity? By looking at it, we could easily say this belongs to England. That is identity, which is influenced by the country's history, landscape and culture. If it is history, by looking at the monuments we could identify. By their culture we could identify it as it is the place called England. Some scholars believe English national identity dates back to Anglo-Saxon period. The natural landscape of England is considered a major contributor to its national identity. English food drink, then English culture. Welcome to England. By looking at all these symbols we could identify it as all England. The natural landscape of England is considered a major contributor to its national identity. National symbol of England is a St. George's cross and its patron saint is St. George. The national animal of England is a lion. By looking at their menu, by looking at their monument, by looking at the pictures, we could identify the national identity of England. Representation of minorities in business, sports, literature and politics. Minority representation in business, sports, literature and politics can be challenging and there are many factors that affect it. Politics. Some challenges to minority representation is politics includes minority recognition and legal status, positive electoral measures, parliamentary procedures for addressing minority issues, policy accommodation of majority and indigenous group, media and social society awareness. Representation can be important because it allows minorities to feel validated and express their opinions. It can also create a team environment where ideas are diverse, perspectives are varied, and everyone feels valued. What are the topics we have learned in this social history of England? Yes, the first one is Tudor England. In this, Henry VII, 8, Edward 6, Mary 1 and Elizabeth 1. Let us all recollect all the points. These are the Tudor dynasty kings and queens. The next is Stuart age. The kings are James I, Charles I, then Commonwealth Protectorate. Then Charles II, James II, Mary II, William III and Anne, Queen Anne. It was a prosperous period. Bibles have been introduced, churches were opened, many popular writers have arisen. Then American War of Independence occurred and there was a big war between America and Britain. France joined with America and at last they won the war in 1783. The war goes on for about 8 years. This was a great thing occurred in American War of Independence and this is also called as American Revolution. Then what are the impacts occurred after the war? The centuries of oppression came to an end. So many nobles have come, but poor people have suffered a lot and taxes were put for many purposes. Rise of colonies in America. So many colonies have raised. Many people have joined with America and so many colonizations have occurred and Spain, Portugal and other countries for power and wealth have increased. 1606, 1607, 1620, 1624, 1638 and 1732. Many American colonies have increased due to King James, Virginia Company, Pilgrims, the Dutch colonized and Swedish movement and then provinces of Georgia. Development of transport and communication in the 19th century. So many have developed and when Alexander Graham Bell has introduced telephone during this 19th century, penny post, telegraph, cables, James Watt have introduced first steam engine and Peony Richard Trevithick has introduced locomotives and so many occurred during this time. Development of science and scientific discoveries in England and Europe in 19th century. No state education, only working class people have introduced many schools such as day school, charity school, Sunday school. Only the people, those who are well-to-do could go to the schools during this time. Many headmasters like Samuel Butler and Thomas Arnold have introduced during that time. 60s, what occurred in 60s? What have happened in 70s? So many prime ministers, inflation rate became alarming during this time. Writers like John Barth, Susan Sontag, John Fowles, Graham Greene, Doris Lessing and other writers flourished during this time. And then in the year 80s, many advanced features occurred, many technologies have developed, medicinal field technology was developed, transport it was developed, trade, everything developed, communication, information technologies, everything developed during 18th century. Margaret Thatcher held from 1979 to 1990. So many provinces have developed, many things occurred during this time. Charles Diana got married during this time. Eye-opening year is 18th century. 19th century also many great things occurred during this time. Mobile internet was on lead during this time. Contemporary England, there was 52% of country voted to leave the social, economic and cultural life of British. Scotland, Northern Ireland and Europe also put it for remain in EU. The relationship with Scotland and Northern Ireland increased. Religious and political complexities, particularly related to troubles in Northern Ireland, can sometimes strain the connection. The evolution of monarchy through the 20th and 21st century occurred during this time. Post-imperialism in England has occurred. And then multicultural Britain has occurred. There were several government agencies involved in multiculturalism, including the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Governments, and Equalities and Human Rights. English identities were introduced during this time. English national identities such as history, landscape and cultures are developed. Representation of minorities in business, sports and literature, politics are developed, and so on occurred during this time. Media and civil society awareness have increased, and these all we have learned. In life in 17s, the Wilson era came to an end. Edward Heath was elected in 1917. Edward Heath was elected in 1970s and attempted to push Britain into the efficient future. Increase in real estate and so on, city development was great. Inflation rate became alarming. Trade aggressive was so government collapsed in 1974 but returned as next Prime Minister. During that time, power cut, food shortage, wage demands, inflation and public borrowing ruined the country. Writers were John Barth, Susan Sontag, John Fowles, Graham Greene, Doris Lessing and other writers have also developed during this time. In 1990s, there was a great things occurred and so many rockets are introduced. Incredible advances in communication and information technologies, medicines, transport, trade and so on have increased. Margaret Thatcher held from 1979 to 1990. Biggest social event occurred. Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer's wedding happened during this time. Minor strike England led to the prosperity. Glory came to an end. And during this 19th century, technologies developed. Mobiles have introduced. Internet was on great level. New tax known as community charge introduced. Many taxes were put for these technological development. Biggest protest known as the poll tax riots against Thatcher government was introduced and they were dissatisfied because of these taxes. And so newly formed UK Independent Party was introduced in 90s. It was a milestone completed 50 years of throne in England. Royal families were on sorrow. Queen Elizabeth II lost her sister Princess Margaret and also her mother. And in relationship with Scotland and Ireland, Northern Ireland, there was a close relationship between Scotland and Northern Ireland, marked by deep historical, cultural and economic ties, largely due to their geographical proximity, shared Celtic heritage and significant population movements between the two regions over centuries. However, religions and political complexities, particularly related to the troubles in Northern Ireland, can sometimes strain the connection. The revolution of monarchy through the 20th and 21st century, mass society opposed by anti-colonial and nationalist and Marxist movement occurred. Post-imperialism have occurred in England. Multicultural Britain was introduced. There are several government agencies involved in multiculturalism, including the Department for Housing, Communities and Local Governments, and there was Equality and Human Rights Commission and so on. National symbols of England is St. George's Cross and its patron saint in St. George. The national animal of England is lion. The natural landscape of England is considered a major contributor to the national identity. Some scholars believe the English national identity dates back to Anglo-Saxon period. English national identity is a sense of belonging to the English people, which is influenced by the country's history, landscape and culture. Representation can be important because it allows minorities to feel validated and express their opinions. It can also create a team environment where ideas are diverse, perspectives are varied, and everyone feels valued during this reign. Thank you. The Stuart age, James I, Charles I, Commonwealth, Protectorate, Charles II, James II, Mary II, William III, and William III has ruled from 1689 to 1702. Anne has ruled from 1665 to 1714. Age of Queen Anne. It was a prosperous period known as the Gestan Age, inspired people to go to churches. Bible study revived, Anglican Church opened, several charity schools were introduced in England, fierce rivalry between Tories and Whigs came to influence through papers and pamphlets of literary men. Joseph Addison for Whigs and Jonathan Swift for Tories wrote several pamphlets, created great political influences. American War of Independence, war between President of Great Britain, 30. North American colonies were established and colonies government fought against. In April 1775, both fought against France and supported America in 1778. Revolution turned civil war into international conflicts. The American won in 1781 and Britishers surrendered in Yorktown in 1783. Formally ended. The war formally ended, and 8 years war goes on. Religious theme developed, colonial fascination with science, nature, freedom and information. Impact of the war on England. Centuries of oppression came to an end. Several causes for the revolution: social, economical and political and intellectual, noble representation, wealth, class, educated people, doctors and merchants have increased and were privileged during this time. Poor peasants' lives was very difficult and poverty were everywhere. They paid taxes to the state, churches and nobles were developed. Rise of colonies in America. The colonization of Americas began in the early 16th century and continued till 1776. When the 13 colonies were incorporated into the United States, England was looking for the new markets and more profitable fields for its labor and capital. English colonists wanted to compete with Spain, Portugal and other countries for power and wealth. Rise of colonies in America. 1606, King James I of England granted charters of Virginia Company and the Plymouth Company to establish permanent settlements in America. In 1607, the Virginia Company established Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in America. 1620, the Pilgrims, English Puritans, separatists, settled Plymouth colony in what is now Massachusetts. 1624, the Dutch colonized New Netherlands, which later became New York. 1638, the Swedish founded the first permanent settlement in Dalby as part of the colonies of New Sweden. 1730, the province of Georgia was established, completing 13 colonies. Development of transport and communication in 19th century. During Victorian era, field of transport and communication have developed. Introduction of steam engine, railway penny post, telegraph and cables have introduced. First steam engine was made by James Watt in 1769. Richard Trevithick, a pioneer of locomotives, introduced railways to the world. Speed of first train was 30 miles per hour. Telephone was introduced by Alexander Graham Bell in 1879. Development of science and scientific discoveries in England and Europe in the 19th century. No state education for common people, working class people, illiterate. 3 kinds of schools were opened for working class people, such as day school, charity school and Sunday schools. Children well-to-do were luckier than poor people. Only well-to-do people could learn during those times. Famous public schools were opened: Eton, Harrow, Rugby and Westminster was great professors during this reign. Outstanding headmasters were Samuel Butler and Thomas Arnold. Life in 60s. Tremendous changes in international social and cultural affairs. Man walked on moon first. Ever human heart transplantation had carried out during this time. Human reach of pinnacle was in pinnacle during the civilization. After 40s and 50s wars, British reconstructions and stabilization was occurred. Changes in living standards, lifestyle and attitudes in 1964. Harold Wilson has become the Prime Minister. Death of great leaders occurred during this time. John Kennedy and Jawaharlal Nehru and Martin Luther King's death occurred. Joseph Heller's Noble Catch 22 was published in the year 1961. Norman Mailer's An American Dream in 1965 was published, and so many books have published during this time. And we have seen life in 60s, life in 70s, life in 80s, life in the 90s in England and contemporary England, relationship with Scotland and Netherlands and Ireland, evolution of monarchy through 20th and 21st century, post-imperialism in England, multicultural Britain in England, English national identities in England, and representation of minorities in business, sports, literature and politics in England. And these are the things we have learned. Thank you. Thank you everyone.